Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Professional Development, the New York City Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Noah, and today I'm joined for a very special edition of the show with a friend and colleague, Price, who is joining me today for our first edition of COVID-positive teachers in conversation. Price, how are you?
Just positive as can be, Noah, it's I'm doing all right. Yeah, full disclosure on this, we both got COVID probably from the same classroom.
So today we're going to go through some of what's been going on the past couple of weeks in New York City public schools, sort of at a systematic level. And we'll also talk about what's going on at a local level in our experience at the same school. But before we do that, Price, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? We know you're a teacher, but how did you get into that role? How long have you been teaching? What are you interested in nowadays? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. So, hi, I'm Price. I came up, I'm a new teacher, like new for COVID, I guess. I had that kind of 2-year gap where I still felt like I was in limbo doing a new job. This is my 3rd year teaching. I came up through a teacher preparation program that I'm assuming I'm allowed to name.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, Teach for America. I came up through Teach for America. I'm a very recent college graduate. Like, I'm 24. Like, got straight out of college, came into teaching. Through like untraditional background, I was not studying education. I was studying public policy. And I linked up with Teach for America in junior year because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with a policy degree yet, but I felt like teaching was a really good way to grow and be doing something that's worthwhile. So that followed me to where I am now. Noah and I work at the same school. It's been a blast. Always an adventure. And yeah, I mostly do economics and government. We teach a class together. We teach a music class together. And yeah, as far as what I'm interested in right now, it's mostly just surviving, frankly, which is, I think, on the minds of a lot of teachers around the city. I think that just about covers it.
Yeah, and that's sort of the subject of today's episode, writ large, is this idea of surviving and whether or not that's a feasible thing in our current situation. So it is Wednesday, December 22nd. In New York right now, it is about a 2 to 3 hour wait at minimum to get tested for COVID. It is a 2 to 3 to 5 day return time on PCR tests. This I know from experience, having tested positive for COVID on Monday of this week, so the 19th. Or is that right? No, today is the 22nd. Okay, 20th. Sorry, on the 20th.
Have to count backwards. Yeah. And I tested positive on the Friday before. So that would make that, I guess that's the, keeping up the mental map, the 17th.
Yes. So, and we are at a school where I think at this point about a quarter of the teachers have been out for a few days running. So, we can, probably that's not to go to a wedding, right? We can
most likely not.
Yeah.
Unless somebody is getting married to somebody else in the building,
right?
It's very unlikely that many people are going to be out.
Right. So, so it's clearly a very peculiar time to be teaching at the moment. And this is not just in our building. From what I've gathered from teacher Twitter and teacher Facebook and all of that, there are lots of people who are just completely have no idea what's going on. And that's not just from the COVID fog that some of us have been forced into, which, for the remainder of the episode, if it sounds like I'm having trouble keeping my focus, that might have something to do with it, or else that's
a little bit of the COVID fog.
Right.
Yeah.
That's going to be my excuse anyway. So Yeah, let's go through a bit of what's been going on the past couple of weeks. Wednesday of last week was when you got your close contact notice. Is that right?
I got in a close contact notice on Tuesday, but I
Tuesday.
think
Got it.
what you're thinking about is Wednesday was the day that our principal, called me directly and
Gotcha.
asked
Gotcha.
me to be the one to contact families
Ah, yeah. Okay. So tell
because
us a little more about
yeah,
that.
yeah, that was a very unusual call. It's like a 6:30 p.m. when on a Wednesday night, and I get a phone call from the principal, which is I assume somebody has died. Because that's like a weird time to get the call from the boss.
Right.
But yeah, she called to say like, hey, so there's been two positive confirmed cases in the junior class. I'm a junior advisor. So they kind of handed it out to the advisors because our test and trace system run through their situation room and all that kind of stuff, very backed up right now, it turns out. And we weren't able to get anybody on the phone over there. I used the royal we there. I'm not on the line directly with the situation room.
Well, turns out
But
nobody
they were
is lately.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I have to be the one to call home to families and explain what happened, what's going on, and like I'm the one peddling the information about like best next steps. I wrote it down on the back of like a letter. Like I had some open mail, and the principal was like, "Hey, you're gonna say like roughly this script." So I kind of like jotted it down really quickly and just like did my best with that. Spent like hour and a half calling families and getting yelled at by families. Families are very upset. They're not happy with this kind of like everybody's dipping out back to remote learning on this individual basis. And understandably so, I was very upset. And then like I acknowledge that happens. And then in the back of my mind, I'm like, wait a minute, you and I teach a junior class, and my junior advisory met a few days before. So then I like the next night I start to feel sick, and then Friday morning, like 100-degree fever, I go get my test and it comes back positive. So it was a little whirlwind 3 days of like watching it happen to myself in slow motion.
Right. Right. Let's circle back and talk about that script because I'm curious what it was that that you were sharing with the families that made them so unhappy. Do you happen to have your artifact with you on the back of that letter?
What did I do with? I remember what I wrote
All
down
right,
because
let's hear
I
that.
had to do it like 14
Right,
times.
you should have it
Um,
memorized by now.
yeah, it was very much like a. They didn't give me the like kind of language like the pretty language to use. It was more like the procedure. It was just to keep it straight of like it was like a logic tree. Like if vaccinated, this. If not vaccinated, go down like this path here.
Right.
We're basically like I'm calling home and asking students if they're vaccinated because I like kind of wasn't allowed to ask that before, wasn't supposed to know that before. So I have to ask them if they're vaccinated because I think that even anybody in the school has that information.
Mm.
So I'm calling home, asking students and like families if they're vaccinated. And if they are vaccinated, okay, I need you to like keep track of your own health and let me know if anything changes. Because if so, we're going to need you to quarantine. There has been positive cases. And if they were not vaccinated, which applied to half of my advisory,
Oh
so like
wow.
out of 13 students, there were seven that I had to ask to stay home because they were unvaccinated. Um, Everybody that like came back in like the next day was vaccinated. Nobody that was vaccinated was feeling ill. But I asked that many kids to stay home and quarantine. Um, with one like interaction, it got like particularly bad. Was like I called, we talked, hung up. I got the call back, and it was like a long argument kind of where it was very one-sided of the mom desperately wanted to like vent her frustration, which like she should. I was very frustrated as well.
Yeah.
Not at her, like at the situation. It was awful
Right, right.
because basically we were telling her that her daughter needed to go back into remote learning where she's not getting good direct instruction, even though everything that we're posting is being posted online. Like that's been the good part is that we're like more adept in this sort of digital space. But the downside is we don't have the staff to be actively like teaching children well when they're remote and they're not getting any kind of a good school day out of it. Nobody learned as well in quarantine, and that was when we were all trying to Zoom with them.
Right.
Now we're just telling them like, hey, you have to stay home. There's been a positive case. We're going to keep on trucking in here because we're vaccinated, a lot of like la-di-da-di-da, and you have to figure this out on your own. And we're doing our best. We're trying to support them, but it's just not a good situation for anybody. Like they're not getting the education that they deserve. And I'm sitting there feeling like I'm failing them, but I don't have the hours in the day to be teaching them in person and teaching them online. I just can't do it.
Right. You would basically have to double your teaching periods, hours wise, in order to do the same kind of job, both in person and remote, as you would be doing if you were just attending to one of those.
Absolutely. And like, mind you, that this is like while our in-house tech person left there because of the vaccine mandate back in October. So I'm like, until like I think literally 2 weeks ago, I've also been the tech guy. So I've actively been doing like roughly 2 full-time jobs in the same space, and then wishing that I could be doing this third full-time job in that same space, but I like physically cannot do it.
Right. Right. And that in-house tech job that you picked up, if I recall correctly, one of the things that spurred you on to taking on that extra work, in addition to wanting to help out at school, which is something that's a teacher thing. It's like, oh, there's something that needs doing. Like, oh, I'll figure out a way to do that because it's needed. It'll help. But then one other reason for that, if I recall correctly, has to do with your teacher preparation program. Is that right?
Well, yeah, a little bit less directly the teacher preparation program and more just like the way, kind of the environment that was made during last year's quarantine. Like I am like, through my teacher preparation program, I have to be participating in a grad school program while I'm here. Like I do not hold my master's yet. I was supposed to finish it last year, but I've moved some classes because of quarantine. I was like not doing well. I was desperately trying to get my students to do well in classes, and I was not doing well. So I moved some of my classes to like a further semester. But I lost support from like teacher prep program in the sense that like we were all thrown into the like void of quarantine. Nobody was getting supported well. So then I was left with a bill that I really couldn't pay, but I had to stay in grad school. So that takes kind of the guild off my cage a little bit there. But it makes me sound less like a crazy person. It explains why I was trying to also do the tech job.
Right.
It's less that like I was actively inviting that pain, which I like understand a lot of teachers do pretty frequently. But yeah, so it was born like out of necessity on my part and the building's part. We were left high and dry without a tech person, without substitutes. So like people had to step up where they could. I just happened to also need the money to keep being a teacher because I have to stay in grad school.
Right.
Yeah. So that it's been a very, very fun couple months.
So returning to this parent who was not thrilled with the situation, and I think there are lots of different reasons why different parents might be frustrated with the situation, but this one in particular was because the parent did not want their child to have to return to remote learning, which just didn't work for their child.
Yeah. Oh, and it was so much worse because this girl had just gotten out of quarantine as well. The first day that she had been back in the building was the first day that like, hey, from this date, if they've been in the building, they have to quarantine. So she had just gotten out of quarantine, comes back, finds out that she may have been exposed again, and had to go back into quarantine.
So a sort of scattershot of different exposure incidences as a result of there just being a ton of COVID in the building. But yeah, this particular child only managed to be back for one day before a different exposure notice meant that she had to quarantine again. But the parent wasn't really mad at you so much as the situation. You're also mad at the situation. And really, when we're talking about the situation, part of what we're talking about is the situation room, which has been inaccessible by and large since Monday of last week. So let's see. This Monday was the 20th. So since December 13th, the Situation Room has been very difficult to get in touch with. And unfortunately, the Situation Room is the central command for making COVID-related decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
So without that sort of brains of the operation, the whole entire New York City public school system is sort of just going on as if everything is normal, whereas inside there's COVID spreading, and it's not just any COVID. It's Omicron. It's the COVID that is very easy to catch, even if you're following all of the precautions.
Yeah, and it's particularly frustrating. Like you and I were talking before we jumped on here about like the way that we've been following the rules, like pretty strictly for like the 2 years since we've been in this like situation. Like granted, like yes, like I'm a young guy. When I found out that we could go back to bars and things like that, I like have been out like a few times, but I have been like extraordinarily safe and basically not at all since the school year started. I don't have the time. I'm like burning myself out trying to meet all the different responsibilities we're being asked to meet. But it's particularly frustrating to know that like, yes, you're following all the rules. Like even a student that is being frankly one of the few that is like on point with their masks, like actually keeping them up, not needing us to remind them every 10 seconds, they still have to be asked to quarantine. And like in our case, we are the ones enforcing this like mask rule. We are modeling it. We're trying to enforce it. And then we are the ones that get sick. That's frustrating on everybody's end, I think.
Yeah. I have had my third shot. I was fully vaccinated as early as I could. I biked like 14 miles each way to get down to Brooklyn because I wasn't using public transit. That's how careful I was being, and got my shots as soon as I could, and then went and got the booster. I've been masking, as like basically as much as possible. I've had the mask on. Just going through my building lobby, I'm wearing the mask, and let's see what else. I do not have a physical social life outside of teaching. I started a podcast so that I would have something to do when I wasn't teaching, but it still got me, which means that it could get anybody, because I'm about as careful as you can be, and it got me. So Joe Biden recently was on TV saying that when someone's exposed, as long as they can test, there's no need to quarantine the class. But first of all, testing in New York is very difficult right now. You have to have an extra 4 hours ready to go in order to test, and they're not really testing in school with any regularity and with any like real accessibility. And that's something we can talk about too. But just this notion that as long as you're vaccinated, you're safe. Like, no, it got me. I'm vaccinated. I'm safe. I'm like as careful as I can be, but it still got me.
Yeah. And like on the subject of like the testing lines right now, I waited 3 hours in the cold today to walk away with this. For our audio listeners, this podcast is brought to you by Binax Now from Abbott.
A home testing kit.
A home testing kit.
The same home testing kit that I used on Saturday. On Sunday, to be sure it would be okay for me to go, outside. When I was starting to feel like a twinge of like a tickle in my throat, I used that. Came up negative, and then I that was my last one, so I didn't do it again the next day. But then the rapid that I took the next day was positive. So,
yeah. And the rabbit hole I went down, by the way, to figure out if any of these are good rapid tests. Basically, the data doesn't exist because these are all like commissioned under the emergency use authorization thing.
Right.
So there's not actually any data yet for these rapid tests. You have no idea if this is like even a good one. I like depend on the PCR test normally, but like, and that's like what confirmed my positive case. But like you said, that testing line is like 4 hours long. Where I live, they're shutting down city MD locations. So like that was one of the ways that you could kind of vent that line a little bit. It was a long wait, but you had multiple options. Now there's really only one good solid option in my area, because like even the places that are trying to test people are also facing these like staffing crunches. As I don't know if it's because people are getting sick or like if they're just burning out as well, but it's very much not a sustainable situation.
Right. I still haven't gotten my PCR test results back from when I got tested on Monday. I just got the rapid, and that came up positive. But my PCR that I got at the same time has not come back yet. And they're saying at the City MD that I went to, they're saying 3 to 5 days. We haven't hit that window yet, so I guess that's to be expected. But makes it very difficult to do any real planning on a short-term basis. And this is because Bill de Blasio and his administration closed 40% of the city-run testing sites in the past. I think it was back in November. So that took a good chunk out of what was available. And in that same vein, the reason the Situation Room has been inaccessible, it's not because someone cut the telephone lines. It's because they were only staffed enough to handle the COVID response if we were not in the middle of a wave of COVID positivity. But the moment that wave starts, the cascade starts and the system shuts down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I mentioned this to you earlier as well. This we got this message from United Federation of Teachers from like minutes from the last meeting, and supposedly like with the de Blasio administration on the way out, administrators with like the Situation Room and all that kind of, and like our test and trace cores and all that kind of stuff, they're on the way out too. So everybody's scrambling. Nobody really knows like what's going on at the time when we kind of need them most. It's like the avatar has disappeared. We are missing like key people in key locations right now, and we just don't know what to do.
Right, so that would imply that those are appointed positions, which is that's kind of a peculiar thing, because that should be a skilled position. Like someone should know a thing or two about what they're doing, and typically an appointed position is like a generalist who can be arranged somewhere as a result of a political favor. That's totally fine if it's a generalist's position. But this, it would seem to me, the Situation Room should be staffed by specialists, and so if they are being exchanged with the change in administration, that's worrying, because this was the week where these past 2 weeks are the weeks that we needed people there.
You would hope so. I mean, you'd also hope that like everybody that works in something like the DOE is also like a specialist, but that's the thing with bureaucracies is like, yes, like they can't be like set up and thrown together quickly sometimes, but like other times it's frustrating at the level of just like lack of specialization that's there. It's just not there. It's just people like things get thrown together and they don't work out for us the way they're always supposed to. So like, what do we do about that? I don't know. Right. I tilt at windmills in the field,
Well, the question of what we do in school is that's a question that we should attend to. And so on that subject, this is an article by Matthew Impelli that's in Newsweek. But in the article, there's a statement from a teacher at the school, Sarah Kenny, who's a 10th grade African-American history teacher at this school, and also vice president of the Alliance of Charter School Employees. And what she said is, first, I want to again offer condolences to the family of Elena Thatch, the 12th grader who succumbed to COVID-19 just a week ago today. Elena's death should have been a wake-up call for Olney Charter's corporate managers at Aspira, a sign that we need a more robust COVID mitigation strategy, which should include testing, more nursing staff, a plan for physical distancing in the lunchroom, more stringent mask compliance, and a vaccine clinic on premises. Our union unequivocally did not organize what management are labeling a mass call-out. However, in the aftermath of a student death, dozens of students learning virtually due to quarantine and the surging Delta and Omicron variants, Olney's management should have been more proactive in moving to fully virtual learning before late last night. Kenny's statement continued, "Our educators just want a safe environment for their students to learn and to limit their own exposure to a deadly disease. We wish that Aspira and Olney Charter management felt the same way." So this is not a public school. It's a charter school in the Philly area, but there are, a lot of commonalities in what's going on. They have a charter management company that is not responsive to what's happening COVID-wise in the schools, in the same way that we have a school system in the DOE that is not responsive to the COVID situation. We have a mayor, furthermore, who's sort of steering the ship into the iceberg, because that's that iceberg he thinks is his legacy, but he's the ship's going down, and somehow
he's by the way unequivocally promised not to close down schools across the city.
Right.
He's promised to not change his mind.
His response on the record was no. It's sort of like you're trying to take a lollipop from a child who isn't brushing their teeth enough, and he says no.
Yeah.
And what happened is that then a bunch of people got COVID, and then a bunch of people gave each other COVID, because nobody could get tested over the weekend because there was a huge surge in testing that was a response to the surge in the COVID numbers, and
the holiday season. Everybody's trying to travel right now.
Right.
In the day that I was getting tested, people were arguing to get to the front of the line. Like the Friday that I got tested, because they were like, my flight's tomorrow, like we got to do this. And as everybody's like pushing, shoving, trying to travel right now amidst this surge. And it's like amping the stakes up so much more. It's like a critical time in the school building, and the traveling is only going to make it so much worse.
Right.
And we're behind. We're so behind.
Right. And the people who were trying to get to the front of that line so that they could travel the next day, whether or not they got their results back, they're probably still traveling. So that's the other thing is this is New York right now, but it's going to be everywhere next week and the week after. And so when it comes time to come back from break, it's just going to be, I have no idea what's around the corner, but it can't be any prettier than it's looking right now for us.
There was this documentary. This is a little bit of a tangent, and I'm going to desperately Google this to make sure that I got this right. But yeah, it's did you see the Spike Lee documentary, New York City Epicenters, from like 9/11? It's called From 9/11 to 2021 and a half.
No, I haven't seen that.
It's like episodic. It's on HBO. It's like describing New York as like the epicenter of everything. It begins like framing it around obviously the COVID pandemic, and it's like the heartbreaking footage. It's this thing that like dances that tightrope between being kind of like a love letter to New York and also like its eulogy.
Right.
Like it's both like describing that it will not die, but it's also really sounding the trumpets on it. And it compares it to the way that like it really is the center of everything. Like it also like invokes 9/11 in the title, because it's like talking about how New York is the center of everything. What happens here is going to like radiate out and affect everybody.
Right.
So we're looking at what's happening here now, and we know that it's going to spread out of control, and we know it's going to happen because we've seen it already happen.
Right. There have been two waves that have, indicated the same thing. Like when we're having our wave, everybody else is like, oh, well, that's just New York. And then, it hits them a week later.
Yeah.
It doesn't help that, so many of the people who live in New York, are from somewhere else. So when it comes time to travel, they're, headed home to see family that lives elsewhere.
Yeah. I was supposed to.
Right. Well, that's
I don't know if I can now.
Is,
I'm like literally waiting to see if I can get any kind of a positive test during this a negative test during this holiday to see if I'm able to see family whatsoever. Otherwise, I'm going to be stuck in my room.
Right. I think I'm too late. My 10-day quarantine period from my positive test that's going to have me out of here Thursday of next week. Mom and Dad, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to make it. But I think, lots of people are traveling. And so those waves are forthcoming. They will be hitting other places, in the next couple of weeks. If the past is any indicator, I'm not in the business of spreading false information or making any health claims. I haven't finished my MD yet, but if you're looking at the past as an indicator, that's how it moves. Is there's a wave in New York, and then the waves elsewhere get started.
When I found out that I tested positive, my mom, bless her heart, unvaccinated soul that she is,
Oof.
She offered to drive up and get me. And I was like,
Oof.
There's no way that you are crossing these city limits right now. There's absolutely no way. I'm vaccinated and traverse the subway every day. I got shot down in my own classroom of all places. There's no way I'm letting you unvaccinated come into this city right now, especially have me sit in a car with you for 8 hours because I don't know if I'll be contagious still by the time that she gets here. Returning to this
Newsweek article on the 41 teachers who call out sick, and it's not a mass sick out according to the teacher who sent in a statement, but the possibility for taking some job action is sort of they wouldn't call it a job action, so we shouldn't call it a job action, but that is sort of a precedent that we can see in what went down there. I think with so many teachers out anyway, the final step of the teachers who wouldn't be calling out also making a call and saying I'm not feeling well, I am needing to quarantine because of COVID symptoms or an encounter. The thing is, they say, if you're vaccinated, you don't need to call out, you don't need to quarantine. But turns out you can get it very easily while vaccinated, and it might be milder. My symptoms personally are mild. However, I'm still sick, which is not what was advertised to me with the with the safety protocols that I've been adhering to for so long. So, I think there's something to be said for being a little more cautious than we're told to be at this point, and maybe there is something to be said for calling out regardless of your vaccination status when you get that close contact notice, and maybe the rest of your building also calling out when you've gotten that close contact notice.
Yeah, because you mentioned that the school that we're talking about is bigger than our own school.
Yes.
41 staff, and that was our school. That's a little bit under half our entire staff.
Right.
So there's and again, like I said, we had 30 people absent, just non-coordinated this week, today. If that had been any kind of a sort of marshaled force, if that had been sprung together and pushed in a certain way, we could have had the very same outcome, and it probably would have led to a thing that frankly we kind of need to do. It's kind of just, it's very scary to talk about it almost, because I get why we want to keep the building open, there's a lot of benefits to students that they need that like the school's providing, like therapy services, free lunch, things like that. That if we shut down, that's like harder to provide if we're able to provide it at all.
Right.
We have students that like, I know that we have students in our building that are homeless, that like are in shelters. Like they cannot get like, even in some cases, like this seems rather kind of almost trivial depending on how you view it, but like just the privacy to try to engage in something like a therapy session, like over a computer, if you're able to do that in your location.
Right.
It's like you don't have that. So I understand like the push to try to say like stay open, but all it's doing with this kind of like half measures of just shutting down classrooms, and we can talk more about like classroom closures in a minute because I think they're ridiculous. These like half measures just mean that like it's guaranteeing that we're just going to have a massive blow up down the line instead of saying, hey, this week remote.
Right.
We're calling it, we're being safe, everybody go home, quarantine for a week. And we come back, like it's like hitting the reset button. Like we know everybody's good, we know everybody's tested. We were like able to guarantee that because there's no new mixing in the building, and we all come back and we're all good to go. Instead of having this like uncertainty if we're not sure if we come back from break or not, or like we don't know if like today's the day.
This idea of the classroom closure, this sort of half measure, or like partial quarantine of a class, that's something that Michael Mulgrew sort of alluded to in the statement that he made today. You know, you can say that the school is open if it's officially open, but if there are no children in the building and there are half the staff in the building, it's not actually open. So it's, you know,
it's just making numbers look good. It's
right.
Like, hey, this school isn't closed. It is a ghost town, but it's not closed.
Right. And, you know, while that school is open and those teachers are supposedly teaching in person classes of 3 children, you know, there are 27 children who are missing out on synchronous instruction for the day, which is just a tremendous waste of resources. But this idea of like keep the building open so that students who don't have access to a lot of resources that are only afforded by in-person education can get those resources. This is something that I've, you know, been thinking about and talking about since 2020, because that is absolutely an important consideration. But I think that the question hinging on that consideration is like, how do you actually take care of those kids? And the answer is not, you know, to keep the entire building open. The answer is like the kids who are desperate for that in-person approach to education, like most desperate, everybody benefits from it, right? But the kids who are most desperate for those resources and those services, you keep them in person. And the kids who are, you know, fine either way, who do just as well remotely, you give them the option so that they can, you know, maybe be learning remotely and not acting as disease vectors in a building that is too crowded. You know, the room where you know, where I definitely picked up COVID, but where you know, very, very likely picked up COVID, or very possibly, I should say, we don't know, I haven't finished my MD yet, is a room without windows, and with 2 air purifiers running at medium strength, because any louder and kids have to strain their voices. But those filters haven't been cleaned since they were installed. You know, we're working with kids who we have to remind about 20 times per class to pull their mask up over their nose. You know, all of that can be made easier if there is a remote option, and if there are people who are there to take care of both the kids who have to be in person and the kids who can study remotely. And to return to that question earlier of the student population at the Olney Charter High School, it's a student population of almost 2,000. It's like 1,900 something. So that school is over 3 times the size of ours. but they only had 11 more teachers call out than we had today.
Yeah, frankly, that's on us.
Right.
If only we gotten a little bit sicker.
Right.
We really could have knocked it off the hinges there.
Right, without even trying. And from what I understand, it has been very difficult covering and keeping the school running with the skeleton crew that is there. But the only reason it's been possible is because so many kids have been gone too. And part of the strategy for trying to keep everybody, or trying to keep more people healthy than might otherwise happen, has been to have advisors call parents and tell them, like, it is your right to keep your kids at home if they're not feeling safe. So we nudge nudge, wink wink, you might consider it. But that's sort of a mild version of what other schools have been doing, where there have been some administrators who have sort of, when the Situation Room stopped picking up the phone, sort of took things into their own hands and started making calls themselves, and shutting down classrooms on, the principals are allowed to make the determination and do a 24-hour classroom closure on their own. So from day to day, principals have been making that call, and there was an article in the New York Times about this as well, about the teachers the principals who have had to sort of take things into their own hands.
Yeah, which is like in and of itself a terrifying proposition. It's like we're like kind of playing with stuff that you can't really control anyway. Like when we were in the actual full blended situation last year, where there were in-person classes and remote classes taught in alternating days, the obvious like massive downside of that is that the practical outcome of that is that students got half as much school. They're at school for half the week. They were either in the building half the week, or they were remote half the week. You were not both. You were not like alternating days that you were in person or online. Kids would get half the education, but something that we were able to do because of that was we were able to actually legitimately control like the flow of students. You can't it was that kids would stay in a room the entire day.
Right.
And that in and of itself leads to that's not great. That's not awesome. I'll be the first one to say that. If I am a student right now and I'm sitting in a room the entire day and I don't move, I don't leave the room until advisory at the end of the day, that's not good for really anybody. Like, I would go slowly mentally insane. So it's not entirely that I'm sort of saying that we go back to that, but trying to do classroom closures and trying to operate at full school capacity with unregulated classroom changes, like hallway interactions, things like that. It
and
becomes
the cafeteria
a thing of
too. That's huge.
Yeah,
I mean, any one of our cases that we've had at school, because all of the high schoolers eat at the same time, and because all of the middle schoolers eat at the same time, any one of those cases should have, shut everybody down, except for the vaccinated folks, and even
trying to do any kind of a classroom closure is there's a greased pig loose in the building,
right?
And how do you wrangle that? It's okay, yeah, so this 11th grader got sick, so we can identify the classrooms they were in and their classmates, so we can notify them to quarantine, but there's no way of knowing but also this 11th grader that tested positive was sitting in the hallway eating lunch with his mask off during a transition. Because that happens. They sit in the hub of our school, where to get to any other part of the building, you have to pass through it. At least on the downstairs, anyway. Sitting there eating lunch. A kid sitting there eating lunch can test positive, expose everybody that walks through that space, and that's not accounted for whatsoever.
Right.
So every time they do a classroom closure in our building, at least, because I can't speak to how they're running class transitions and all that kind of stuff at other schools, so I'm not that familiar. But it makes doing classroom closures that makes it the ultimate half measure. There's no way that you're capturing every exposure by doing a classroom closure of just their track of classrooms. It's not possible.
Right. And if you're, also saying that you only have to quarantine if you're unvaccinated, then that's another half measure on top of it. So we're down to a quarter measure at this point because, as I can attest, doesn't matter how vaccinated you are, doesn't matter how much masking you're doing, you can still get it. So honestly, at this point, it's just I read, I don't remember where I read it, but I think this might have been NPR. There was a little article about how at this point everybody has a date with Omicron. It's just a matter of when. If you're doing anything outside of your home, it's coming for you. And in the case of the New York City Department of Education, that just means that there are going to be a bunch of kids getting sick and a bunch of teachers getting sick, unless something is done about safety protocols and testing, better testing, which is what the union is calling for. It's calling for it sort of tepidly, in the same way that the union has been calling for all sorts of stuff all year, but with a very quiet voice, followed by sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That's sort of how the UFT works now. But
the New Yorker article that I mentioned earlier, like what COVID burnout is doing to New York City schools, by a woman named Jessica Winter. It gets into that a little bit. Like, I'm afraid to dive into this article too much because we could spend the entire time talking about it, because it's just multiple vignettes of like what it's like in the buildings right now.
Right.
And one of them is about like this whole thing with like what the UFT is pushing for. And yes, like it was announced that adults can get tested as well. So, school staff has the option to do that now. But it has stipulations. It has stipulations, right? You have to wait until every student in the building is tested, which also, by the way, this is like an experience that I've noticed in our building, and also that like a mom of one of my students has confirmed for me for like their child at a different school, is that you can only test the unvaccinated part of the population that has opted into it.
Right.
And for a while, if not enough students have opted into it, you're just pulling the same kids randomly. Audio listeners, I'm doing air quotes.
Right.
Is that they're just randomly pulling like the same kid, essentially. Like the mom that I was talking to said that her student had been pulled out like for 5 of the tests in a row, because there's just not enough like of the student population that has opted into it. Right. So that whole thing aside, that's not even my main point. The UFT like saying that yes, adults can opt in to get testing now, but the stipulation is that it can only be done after student testing is completed, and like if the testing service wants to. The actual reality of that is just schools just not being able to do adult testing. Like
right.
Teachers, adults trying to opt into it to test in the school building during the day when it's there, but they're being turned away. There's no like actual enforceable arm of that, especially when like the timing for testing sites in the city perfectly contradict with school hours. The one near me, the one that I depend on, the one that is like they do the PCR test and they get me like semi-decent turnaround, is open from 8:30 to 4, Monday through Saturday.
Which is exactly when your school is open. Yeah.
Yeah, practically I cannot go to that site except on Saturdays, unless I call out. And I only call out if it's like bad. And I have the option to. The Friday that I called out sick to go and get a test, I sent a picture of my thermometer to like everybody in admin that I needed to notify administration that I was going to be like absent from school that day. Just sent them a picture of the thermometer, said I'm going to get tested. I was told that when I come back we may need to talk about my attendance because they're worried about it, and I was like, look at my thermometer.
So this is a good piece of information for the audience to have as well, for teachers who are in the DOE. So you are authorized to take time off to go get tested. and you are not required to come back until you've gotten your test results. You can take all of those days, and they do not come out of your car. They can come out of a separate source of days for COVID related stuff. So, and that's the same source of days that being out for COVID comes from. So, all you have to do is document your stuff. So if you send in your test results, which includes both the date that you got tested and the date that you received the test results, that time will not come out of your days off, your car days. Sorry, not days off, they're sick days, / personal business that are amalgamated into your car. Anyway, none of those are impacted by COVID absences. The thing is, I think you only get 10 of those COVID absences. So I'm going to use up 4 of mine this week for having COVID. And, I did a couple of days out for testing previously, as well as for, I got a little sick after my booster. So I think I'm probably just about out. So hopefully I don't get COVID again this year. But for you, hopefully that means that they won't have to talk to you about your attendance anymore.
We'll see. I'm eternally confused. I still very much have the new teacher mojo, because I really only had before quarantine. I didn't even finish my first full year. This year in person completes a rough 2-year actual in-person experience for me.
Right.
Yeah, I'm more used to being a remote teacher than I am to being an in-person teacher. Yeah. Which is also a terrifying concept.
Sometimes I forget about that with your group in particular, because you were the last big group of new teachers that were hired before this year. I guess this year we've got a big group of new teachers, but
yeah, there was a hiring freeze last year, no new faces,
right?
Throughout the entirety of the pandemic, which has made it feel more like it was frozen in time,
right?
But yeah, or just new faces, and we forget that we're also still actively trying to figure out how to be good in-person teachers while trying to grapple with all this and try to deal with the fact that nobody knows what they're doing.
Right.
When nobody knows what anybody's doing, it makes them forget that there are teachers that are still trying to learn. It's when I think about the mountain of that, I kind of just stare off into the mid-distance a little bit.
And speaking of the mid-distance, so at this point, it's pretty clear that we're not going to go fully remote before break, because tomorrow is the last day before break, and it doesn't seem like, if none of what's happened so far was enough, then I don't think Bill de Blasio is going to back down from the no strategy. So I reckon
noble as it is,
right?
It's very noble.
Noble. Yeah. So the question is, how are things going to look after break? And of course, you can't know the answer to this. None of us can. But we will have a new mayor and we'll have a new chancellor. So what are your thoughts in looking towards the return to break? And apologies for asking you to ponder the return from break before we've even started break.
Yeah, what I'd like to see happen in the next couple of days is them announce like me personally, I do thrive on in person. When we were remote, I was not doing well, mentally speaking, just trying to muster up the energy and resolve to keep on doing what I was doing every single day, remotely trying to reach out to everybody that I needed to in such a high stress job. Put a big strain on me. So I am probably the last one to say that I want us to go back to remote full time. But I would love it just in the face of this, just to say hey, when we come back from break, we're going to be remote only for 1 week to give everybody time to return home, get tested, and kind of guarantee that we're going to be coming back into a safe pool of people. That would be my ideal. It's because beyond that, I very frankly have very few things to ask from the city. aside from the fact that de Blasio is very, very stoutly and very stoically refusing to do anything about what's going on, like the city has very little impact on my day to day.
Right.
I just need them to say, like, hey, are we going in today? And then like it's almost like I can just figure out the rest. Like with whatever else in hand that I can figure it out. But I just need to know, like, are we gonna keep on like soldiering on into this wave of like an impossible task? Or are we going to admit that like we cannot deal with this right now? We need to pause. We need to go remote for a week. Give everybody the time that they need to like guarantee that they're safe and that we're all back okay. And then come back, reduce that anxiety, feel like we actually have the thing under control. That would be my ultimate dream, like transitioning out of de Blasio into Adams. That's what I would like to see when we come back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that just having that little bit of forethought, or you know, what knowledge of what we can expect when we get back from break, I think would really set my mind at ease as well. Regardless of what it is, you know, I would just like to know what the call is ahead of time, because you know, we've sort of gotten used to knowing that the only place where we can look for information is Twitter the day of, or you know, 12 hours before. That's how they did the shutdown the first time around. That's how they did the call that they made in May. That's how it's been every step of the way. Is like Twitter finds out first, and then we find out from Twitter, which is just a huge bummer. So it
gives me a great sense of security personally. Right. I feel very secure when that happens.
Yeah, whatever the call is, it's going to happen through Twitter, and so be ready for it. You know, the contract negotiation, Twitter. The dissolution of tenure, Twitter. It's whatever it is. That's where it'll be. But so yeah, that forethought would be nice. That little bit of planning would be nice. I think the thing that would make me feel a little bit less like I'm out of my mind, or you know, I think so many of us in the system right now are looking around like, is nobody else seeing this? Like, look, no, where am I the only one who cares about the rules? Like, someone please call somebody that everything's broken. What I would really like to see is an admission of what has happened. It's not being talked about enough, and as a result, you know, like parent Twitter and parent Facebook is really mad at individual schools, which is, you know, like this was your experience calling home and talking to parents, is a lot of parents who are mad at school, right? And school doesn't have any power in this case. When the brain of the DOE gets shut off from the body has to keep going, or else the body gets fired. You know, so I think it would have been nice if there had been a little bit more grassroots organization. I think it would have been really nice if the union could have stepped in, other than to say like, we're very displeased with this. You know, it would have been nice if any of that could have happened. But with that not being the case, it would just be really good for there to be some clarity. The one institution that's responsible for all of this, for all of the cases, for all of the spread that happened after principals were not authorized to make calls in their buildings and that sort of thing, is the DOE and the mayor and the chancellor, who wrote this hilarious email a little while back about all that was accomplished in 9 months under her chancellorship. I went from that window in which I was reading that email to a different window where I looked at the NYC DOE COVID map that is updated every day. I was like, that is what you accomplished. None of this.
Which, by the way, that map is not updated.
Right.
It's absolutely not.
Right.
When I
It
found
hasn't
out
been updated
that,
in a week.
yeah, because one school closes is like actual full school closure is happening every week in the city. And when I found out that a school near me had closed, I tried to check the site to be like, oh, let's see if they like are actually keeping up to date with this. No, it was not reflected on there at all. It's the data is so behind. We know we have like a number that we have. We have like the tested number. And that in and of itself is concerning enough. Like the amount of school closure, the like partial classroom closures, full school closures, that in and of itself is alarming enough. Like we would know if a whole of their school was being shut down, but we know that the number is worse than what it is because we're behind. We know that it's worse.
Right.
Or like maybe we just don't want to say that it's worse. But if we have this certain number and we're behind, it's like the logical step to be like, okay, it's definitely worse. We just get to decide like if it's going to be astronomically worse or if it's going to just be like a little bit more worse than it is now. We get to say like we are going to stop this from exploding because it's this unknown problem. We don't have the eyes on it that we could. We're like charging forward and hoping that it's not really that bad and that we don't have to like go the full nuclear option. But that's so irresponsible. That's wildly irresponsible. I'm 24 years old.
Right.
I'm fresh out of college, and I'm looking at that, and it's making me feel like I'm looking at a frat house. That's
right.
I don't mean to compare the Department of Education of New York City to a frat house, but I'm looking at it, and just like it just feels wildly irresponsible. Like just pushing ahead, knowing that it's worse than we're admitting that it is,
right.
and not doing anything about it.
Yeah. Objects in mirror are closer than they appear. Yeah. It's like giving, it's like on Halloween being the fourth period teacher who hands out a bunch of candy, knowing that you have colleagues who are teaching a sixth period class, who are going to have to clean up after you. So like Bill de Blasio is charging into the winter break. And, once school's out, I guess it's just on the kids and their families to figure out what to do next. And it's because a bunch of them are going to have COVID. I teach because I care about children. And and as a member of the DOE, as a teaching role in the DOE, I am part of a system that does not deserve the trust of families because of honestly because of mayoral control, right? But beyond that, because of complicity with mayoral control and this mayor's insistence on running an experiment with human lives.
Yeah, that's the mic drop. That's the mic drop right there.
Well, I suppose we can wrap things up. I think we touched on most of what we were going to talk about. We never got to the Prince George's County going virtual, but plenty of other people talked about that. It's the things that nobody's talking about that I think are a little bit more important, like the reminder that it's not your individual, it's not your child's individual school. It's the Situation Room, it's the DOE, and it is Bill de Blasio. That's who you should be mad at. Those are the people who can do something. Right now, unfortunately, the schools can't do anything, and the teachers can't do anything within the purview of our contract. We, of course, could and maybe should consider doing something outside of the purview of our contract, especially if Michael Mulgrew doesn't have a plan. But there's nothing that we can do legally at the moment.
I'm about to find out if 311 can do anything. One of the mom of the child that I've been talking about that's been very upset. She's her next step is 311. She called me, she called the school, she's calling 311. If anything changes at the school, I know it wasn't me, I know it wasn't the school, so maybe 311's got the juice that we've been looking for.
All right, well, keep us updated, and if that is the approach, the audience, y'all will be the first ones to know about it.
You heard it here first. This is an exclusive.
All right, well, Price, thanks so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for talking to me about your experience and for getting upright in the midst of COVID positivity to talk through what's going on in schools.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. And admittedly, this is the first time I've been upright in the past few days.
All right,
well, a little sitting up straight joke. That's a classic sitting up straight joke. That's for the fans out there.
Well, I hope this is the start of many upright days to come in good health and safety. So all the best to you.
Thanks. You too, Noah.